The evening Lucius Malfoy was arrested, the last light of day bled thinly over the Wiltshire hedgerows and struck Malfoy Manor in a color like tarnished silver. The house had always seemed to belong less to England than to some older and crueler country, one of frost-bitten princes and ancestral oaths. Its peacocks moved pale as ghosts across the lawns. Its windows burned with controlled gold. Its gates, wrought in black serpents and curling leaves, were opened only for those who understood that old name still ruled much of the magical world, whether the ministry admitted it or not. Lucius stood before the drawing-room hearth with his hand resting on the silver head of his cane, and the air of a man who believed that disorder happened to other families. He had been reading correspondence, much of it already burned, and had gone twice in the last quarter hour to the tall windows overlooking the West Terrace. He disliked uncertainty. More than that, he disliked silence, and silence had spread through certain circles in recent weeks like frost along glass. Men who once answered owls in minutes now delayed for days. Old allies who had worn masks and hoods with him at the height of terror were suddenly occupied with foreign cousins, obscure ailments, inconvenient travel. Even fear, Lucius thought, had become vulgar in some people. They feared too openly, and so became dangerous. He heard the front doors open below. Narcissa looked up from the chaise where she had been sitting with a book unopened in her lap. She had not turned a page in nearly an hour. The skin around her eyes tightened by the smallest degree. "Were you expecting anyone?" "No," said Lucius. There were footsteps in the entrance hall, firm and many. Not the diffident haste of a servant. Not the padded glide of house elves. Boots. Ministry boots. Lucius did not move at once. His first sensation was not alarm but outrage, a colder and deeper thing. Men like Cornelius Fudge spent half their lives bowing in subtler forms before wealth and lineage, and then arrived at a noble house with boots and warrants, as though they were entering Nocturne Alley. He straightened, every line of him suddenly more aristocratic, more controlled. The emotion vanished from his face so completely that only Narcissa, who had lived beside him long enough to recognize the tension of his breathing, knew he had felt anything at all. Draco entered first from the corridor, white-faced and unsteady. "Father," he said. And in that one word there was the beginning of childhood ending. Amelia Bones followed him into the room with 4 aurors behind her, and Arthur Weasley a half-step to her left. She looked exactly as every whisper in the ministry described her, broad-shouldered, iron-haired, severe without theatricality. There were no traces of Umbridge's sugared malice in her. She did not preen or flutter. She entered the room like the blade of a guillotine descending. Arthur, by contrast, looked uneasy to the point of illness, as though he would rather have been anywhere else on earth than in Lucius Malfoy's drawing room to witness what was about to happen. Lucius gave them a small, dry smile. "Madam Bones, Mr. Weasley, how very dramatic." "Lucius Malfoy," said Amelia. "I am here under authority of the Ministry of Magic to place you under arrest pending investigation and formal charges of possession and distribution of prohibited dark artifacts, bribery of public officials, coercion of witnesses, and suspected participation in acts of organized dark magical violence." The words seemed, for one surreal moment, to hang in the air independent of meaning, as though some clerk had dropped them from a great height and they had not yet landed. Narcissa rose. "This is an insult." "It is a warrant," said Amelia. "You may contest it before the Wisengamot." Lucius's smile sharpened. "Suspected participation. You break into my home on suspicion. Has the ministry become so impoverished that it now lives on rumor?" Arthur flinched almost invisibly, but Amelia did not. "We searched this house 3 times over the last decade, and found enough to justify more than rumor. Your collection of cursed objects alone would have brought down lesser men. This time we also have statements, ledgers, transactions through Borgin and Burks, and a chain of transfers linking you to illegal materials placed in public circulation." "Nay." At that, Lucius's eyes flicked once toward Arthur. It was small and quick, but Amelia caught it. "The diary," Arthur said quietly, as though he regretted the sound of his own voice. "We never proved it then. Not enough for this. But you were careless elsewhere." Lucius's gaze returned to him with a polished hatred. "You should be careful, Weasley, not to confuse envy with righteousness." Draco stepped forward. "You can't do this. My father hasn't done anything." One of the Aurors shifted, but Amelia held up a hand, keeping them still. She looked at Draco, and for an instant something not unlike pity passed through her expression. "Stand aside, Mr. Malfoy." Draco did not move. He was 15, all sharp bones and inherited arrogance, but his hand had strayed instinctively toward his wand. Lucius saw it and snapped, "Draco?" That one word did what Narcissa's whispered pleas could not. Draco froze. Lucius adjusted his cuffs. "Before this vulgar theater proceeds further, I will see the full warrant." Amelia produced it. Lucius scanned it, and as he read, some minute alteration came over him. He remained composed. He even retained an expression of disdain. Yet the perfection of his stillness became too absolute. Arthur saw the moment Lucius understood this was not a raid meant to frighten or extract concessions. It was built, layer on layer, patient, ugly, undeniable. There were names on the parchment that could not be bullied. There were authorizations that Fudge must have signed in hopes of appeasing criticism, without quite believing he would ever need to face the consequences. There were references to vault records, clandestine purchases, an unregistered collection of cursed heirlooms removed by intermediaries, and statements from two frightened men in Nocturne Alley who had at last decided Lucius Malfoy would not save them if things grew worse. "Cornelius approved this?" Lucius asked. "Reluctantly," said Amelia. He gave a short laugh. "Of course. Reluctance is his truest conviction." "Meh. Nye." Narcissa crossed the space between them in 3 pale steps. "You cannot take him to Azkaban over artifacts and paperwork." Amelia's tone did not soften. "I can and I will, unless bail is granted by the Wisengamot." "Azkaban," Draco repeated, and the word seemed to hollow him out. Lucius turned then, not to Amelia but to his wife and son. The room, the Aurors, the ministry, these became secondary for a heartbeat. "This will be corrected," he said, as if announcing a change in dinner arrangements. "Narcissa, send word to Yaxley, to Knott, to the Selwyns. Our solicitors must be summoned at once." "Draco," he paused, and the steel in him became something stranger, more brittle, more intimate. "You will remember yourself. Do not whine. Do not grovel. We are not Weasleys." Arthur's face reddened, but he said nothing. Draco's mouth trembled once with something like fury. "Father." "Enough." Amelia stepped forward. "Surrender your wand." Lucius looked at her as though she had requested a finger. "Absolutely not." The Aurors raised theirs in a sweep of motion so swift that even Draco, who had seen plenty of wands drawn in schoolyard threats, took half a step back. Narcissa's hand went to her throat. Arthur said, "Lucius, don't be a fool." Lucius's eyes flashed. "You should treasure this, Weasley. It will likely be the greatest moment of your life." Yet he drew his wand at last. Not in attack, but between thumb and forefinger. 2 fingers of the other hand delicately pinching the wood as if it disgusted him to surrender anything of himself. Amelia took it. For the first time, a pulse visibly beat in Lucius's throat. 2 house elves began to scream somewhere in the depths of the house. The noise echoed thin and wild up the stairwell. Outside, one of the white peacocks cried in answer. The old house, built to display continuity and dominion, had never been meant to witness its master disarmed in his own drawing room. Every object in it seemed offended. Narcissa moved to Lucius and caught his sleeve. "I'll come." "No, Tonti." His voice was low. "Not tonight." Her composure broke there, not in tears but in fury. "You do not command the terms of this." He looked at her. Whatever passed between them had been built over years of ambition, breeding, shared prejudice, shared caution, shared survival. It was not a tender marriage, perhaps, in the fashion of poorer and freer people, but it was real. "Sissy," he said quietly, the old intimate name transforming his voice into something nearly human. "Listen to me. Speak to no one in haste. Burn what remains in the green cabinet. Not the French letters, the bottom drawer. And do not trust anyone who comes too quickly with sympathy." "No, Thierry." Amelia heard that and signaled sharply to one of her oars. "Search the green cabinet." Lucius's lip curled. How efficiently the state profits from eavesdropping. Draco made a sound between a protest and a choke. "You can't just leave." Lucius turned his head. "I am not leaving. I am being inconvenienced." It might have become absurd if fear had not made it tragic. Arthur had known Lucius Malfoy for years as an enemy of the smiling sort, the kind who ruined lives over committees and signatures and quiet donations. He had imagined in weaker moments what it might feel like to see such a man finally forced to answer for the rot he spread. But standing here now with Narcissa rigid as glass and Draco half shattered, and Lucius wearing his contempt like the last piece of clothing stripped from a prisoner, Arthur felt no triumph. Only the knowledge that some great plate beneath the country had shifted, and that all of them might soon discover the tremors had only begun. Amelia nodded. "Take him." The oars closed around Lucius, though he walked without resistance. He seemed determined that if Malfoy Manor must witness his humiliation, it would at least witness elegance in chains. Silver shimmered at his wrists. Draco lunged once as if to go after them, and Narcissa caught him with surprising force. Mother and son stood together beneath the staring ancestral portraits while Lucius passed through the doorway. At the threshold he stopped and looked back, not at Narcissa, not at Draco, but at the room itself. The dark wood, the old crystal, the fire reflected on polished stone, the inheritance he had believed could protect him from any vulgar reckoning. Then he inclined his head by a fraction, as though saluting an audience not worthy of him. "Madam Bones," he said, "you have made a very dangerous enemy." She met his gaze without blinking. "I think I've had dangerous enemies for a long time." Then he was gone. The echo of their departure lingered in the house like smoke. Narcissa's fingers remained locked on Draco's sleeve. Arthur looked away because there was, even now, something indecent about witnessing them. The search began at once. Oars moved through rooms with murmured spells and hard faces. A cabinet burst open in the corridor. Somewhere glass shattered. Draco ripped himself free of his mother. His eyes were bright, feverish. "You did this," he said to Arthur. "You filthy blood traitor." "Draco," Narcissa said, but he did not stop. "You've always envied us. You and your ridiculous little family. You wanted this." Arthur took the insult because Draco was 15, and because hatred was often grief made vulgar. "Your father did this himself." Draco's voice cracked. "Liar, Tort." Narcissa stepped between them. For the first time, Arthur truly understood what pure-blood pride, stripped of drawing-room manners, actually looked like. It was not pretty. It was not merely snobbery. It was something deeper and older, something forged in lines of marriage and property, and the belief that the world itself was a family inheritance. She faced him with a queen's bearing in a conquered city. "Get out of my house!" Arthur gave the smallest of nods. "Gladly." As he turned away, he heard Draco say, in a child's voice he would have hated anyone else for hearing, "Mother, what if they really take him?" He did not hear Narcissa's answer. Perhaps there was none. Outside, the wind had risen. Amelia stood on the front steps, issuing clipped instructions to her team while Lucius was prepared for transport. The peacocks had retreated into darkness. The manor's windows glowed behind them like watchful eyes. Arthur came to stand beside her. Was it enough? Amelia did not ask what he meant. Enough for arrest. Enough for charges. Enough to ruin him politically. She watched Lucius being led toward the gate. Whether it's enough to keep him, there is another matter. Arthur looked at her. And if it isn't? She set her jaw. Then at least one man in this country will have learned that his name is not a shield forever. But Arthur thought of the World Cup. He thought of the masks in the darkness, the screams, the sky on fire with the dark mark. He thought of whispers already moving through corridors like cold air under a door. Lucius Malfoy was not the worst of them, perhaps. Not the most monstrous, nor the most fanatical. But he was something almost as dangerous. He was the hand that could open respectable doors to evil and ask to be thanked for it. As the Ministry party disapparated into the deepening night, leaving Malfoy Manor wounded but unbroken against the horizon, Arthur felt the first real certainty he had known since Harry Potter had returned from the graveyard with Cedric Diggory's body. Whatever was coming, it would not come exactly as they had feared. It might come worse. Azkaban had a smell that could not be described to those who had never crossed its threshold. Men said it smelled of rot, or salt, or old wet stone. And all of that was true, but incomplete. Its truest odor was hopelessness, and hopelessness had no proper language. It clung to the inside of the mouth. It settled in hair and cloth. It made memory itself seem mold-struck and unreliable. Lucius Malfoy entered it with his head high. The Dementors knew him at once, or seemed to. Perhaps they knew every new prisoner by the shape of his dread. Perhaps they sensed, more keenly than ordinary men, the refined terror of those who had spent a lifetime certain such walls were built for others. Lucius did not scream when the gates shut behind him. He did not plead when his wand was catalogued, his rings removed, his cane taken, his name recorded without any title before it. He gave the guards a contempt so pure it was almost nourishment. But once the cell door closed and he stood alone in the thin dark, with the sound of the sea below, and the rustle of those blind appetites moving in the corridors, something old and primitive stirred in him. He had escaped this place once after the first fall. Not by innocence, he had never insulted himself with that fantasy, but by influence, money, testimony shaped to fit power. He had stood before committees and offered them the explanation they most preferred. Coercion, enchantment, misplaced loyalty, confusion in a time of national panic. Men in office had wanted the war behind them. Men with names and gold and old land were not jailed if they could be repurposed as proof that normal life had returned. Lucius had understood that better than most. Now the same machinery that had once washed his hands had finally turned on him. He sat on the stone bench and closed his eyes. Involuntarily, he heard the ministry clerk's voice from hours earlier reading out the initial remand order. Possession, distribution, bribery, violence. He had nearly laughed at the smallness of the words. Such petty little muggle things, reduced to ledgers and statements, for a man whose true guilt would have frozen their blood if they had understood half of it. If the fools in the ministry imagined they had captured the center of the web, they had misunderstood the age entirely. He was not the spider. He had been at best one of the strongest threads, and the spider had already returned. Far from Azkaban, in a manner no ministry warrant would ever find, the news reached Lord Voldemort by means both magical and human. The first came through the whispering channels that had survived from the old days. Frightened men, loyal women, servants who listened, owls that flew at strange hours. The second came through Severus Snape, late and measured and exact, because even now Snape played a game whose board was too large for most men to see. Voldemort heard him in silence, red eyes reflecting a low green fire. Peter Pettigrew crouched nearby with the strained alertness of a beaten dog afraid of missing the flicker that preceded a kick. "Lucius," Voldemort repeated, and the name slid through the room like a blade withdrawn from wet cloth. "Yes, my lord," said Pettigrew quickly, though he had not been spoken to. Voldemort's face remained unreadable, which was always the first sign of danger. Rages were easy. Men prepared for rages. It was the moments of stillness that killed them. "Arrested," he said. "My lord," whispered Pettigrew. "The ministry are fools. They can be bribed or—" "Bribed?" said Voldemort softly. Pettigrew began to sweat. Snape stood in the shadows, his pale face a mask. Madam Bones has been building the case quietly for some time. Fudge allowed it because he believed it would make him look impartial. He did not expect it to proceed this far. Voldemort's attention moved to Snape, and Lucius did not know. No. That, more than the arrest itself, seemed to interest him. Lucius had always prized awareness. Wealth could be replaced. Political standing could be rebuilt if time were granted. But to be surprised was a humiliation that bit to the marrow. "He is useful," Voldemort said. The statement hung there like a judgment. Pettigrew swallowed. Useful. Lucius had been more than a purse and a respectable face. He had represented a bridge between worlds. Drawing rooms and dark rites, donors and murderers, the polished hand on the shoulder of authority, and the masked figure in the night. He knew which ministers could be threatened, which governors bought, which ancient families could be counted on to sneer at Muggle-born children in public while quietly funding worse in private. He knew how to make evil sound like tradition and cowardice sound like prudence. There were others who could kill more joyfully. Bellatrix, if freed, would kill with song on her lips. Dolohov was a weapon made flesh. But Lucius was the kind of servant that turned governments inside out without splashing blood on the carpets. Voldemort had not yet rebuilt enough of that machinery to lose him lightly. Snape said, "There may be an opportunity to arrange bail." "Maybe," Voldemort repeated. "The Wizengamot remains divided. Bones is formidable, but not omnipotent." A cold amusement touched Voldemort's mouth. "And you offer this because you are eager to save him?" "I offer it because an imprisoned ally is of less use than a free one." Pettigrew darted his eyes between them, sensing currents but not their depth. "My lord, if Lucius talks." "He will not," said Voldemort. Pettigrew bowed his head at once. Yet he had voiced what others would think in secret. Azkaban had a way of finding cracks. Even strong men could be hollowed there. And Lucius Malfoy, for all his pride, loved comfort with an intimacy that fanatic minds often mistook for weakness. He loved his house, his wine, his son's future, his wife's regard, his own stand-in. The Dementors fed best upon attachment. Voldemort rose, and every scrap of heat seemed to leave the room with the movement. "The Ministry," he said, "believes it has struck a darkness while it still hides. That is interesting." He moved toward the fire with slow, elegant steps. "They are wrong, of course, but interesting." Snape inclined his head. "What are your wishes, my lord?" For a long moment the only sound was the hiss of the green flames. Then Voldemort smiled, and it was the sort of smile that had once made grown witches weep in terror without understanding why. "Lucius's fall will frighten the weak. Good. Let them be frightened. Fear is a better oath than blood. Families that hesitated will now scramble to prove themselves useful. Men who thought wealth could buy neutrality will learn that no vault in Gringotts can purchase distance from me." He looked toward Pettigrew. "Send word. Not broadly, carefully. I want their concern sharpened, not dulled by rumor." Pettigrew nearly collapsed in his haste to bow. "At once, my lord." "And Severus," Voldemort said. "Yes, my lord. Watch Narcissa. She loves her husband, which may make her foolish. She loves her son more, which makes her dangerous." Something unreadable moved through Snape's eyes, gone before any other man might have caught it. "I understand." Voldemort turned back to the fire. "Lucius will not break quickly, but Azkaban is patient, and so am I. If he can be freed, he will be freed. If not," he tilted his head slightly, "then we will adapt." It was a word he used as other men might say survive or conquer or butcher. Adapt. As if the country were no more than a body to which his will would fit itself eventually, by vein or by bone. When Snape was dismissed and Pettigrew scampered from the room to carry commands he scarcely comprehended, Voldemort remained alone with the flames. The room around him was severe and old, its windows draped, its silver tarnished, its silence thick with waiting. Since his rebirth, he had been rebuilding from fragments, a snake's patience, a graveyard's certainty, borrowed servants, hidden allies, a careful harvest of fear. He had not wanted open war too quickly. Open war made heroes of young fools. Open war rallied institutions that otherwise preferred comfort. Better always to enter through cracks. Better to seed rot until the tree fell under the weight of its own corruption. Lucius had been a crack. Now one crack had closed. Others must be forced open. In Azkaban, the night deepened. Lucius had begun to feel the first slow ache of the place. It was not yet despair. It was memory turning treacherous. The Dementors did not merely show pain. They arranged one's own life so that joy itself became an accusation. He remembered Draco on a broom at 7, triumphant and shrill with laughter. He remembered Narcissa in the conservatory one winter afternoon, sunlight making a rare warmth of her, and thawing for an instant, the cold pride they both wore like court dress. He remembered himself at 18, hooded and fierce, kneeling before a cause that had seemed magnificent because it was merciless, and because young men of privilege often mistook cruelty for significance. He stood abruptly, angry with the memories. He would not let the creatures reduce him to sentiment. He crossed the narrow cell and placed one hand against the bars. The sea beyond was black and endless. Spray touched his skin like cold breath. Somewhere down the corridor, a man was sobbing without pause. Lucius spoke aloud, if only to hear a human voice. "I will leave this place." The words had the shape of certainty, but not its weight. Azkaban swallowed them. He closed his eyes and saw, not the ministry, not Amelia Bones, but the pale oval of Narcissa's face as the Aurors took his wand. He saw Draco failing to understand. He saw the drawing room at Malfoy Manor, every polished surface suddenly useless. And beneath those images another thought crawled in, one he would never have admitted under any interrogation, one more shameful than fear. My lord would be displeased. It shamed him because it was true. He remained at the bars for a long time, feeling the cold invade his hand and arm. Dawn would come eventually, gray and unwanted. Meals would be pushed through. Lawyers would argue. Names would be summoned. Fudge would prevaricate. Bones would press. The Wisengamot would posture. All the machinery of government would creak and grind. But beyond all that, in the older dark to which the ministry never had proper access, another reckoning had already begun. Lucius understood that with the same clear instinct by which animals know when thunder is on the horizon before men hear it. He lifted his chin and returned to the bench. If the prison meant to take him apart, it would have to labor for the privilege. Yet when the Dementor passed outside his cell an hour later, and the temperature plunged, he tasted once more the memory of Narcissa's hand slipping from his sleeve in the drawing room. And for one brief, hateful second, he was terrified not of prison, not of shame, not of the ministry, but of irrelevance. Harry heard about Lucius Malfoy's arrest before breakfast, though Grimmauld Place had a way of making every hour feel vaguely like midnight. He came down the stairs to find the dining table occupied by Sirius, Remus, Tonks, Moody, and a copy of the Daily Prophet spread open like the body of some smugly murdered bird. The headline was not as large as it would have been had the paper possessed courage, but it was there all the same. Inquiry into Malfoy affairs. Ministry investigates dark artifact connections. Sirius looked up the moment Harry entered. There was a dangerous brightness in him, the sort of brightness Harry had come to recognize as half delight and half a need for movement that the house could not satisfy. "Well," Sirius said, tapping the paper, "it seems one peacock's finally lost his feathers." Harry took the seat beside him and bent over the article. The writing was careful in the most cowardly way, full of phrases like alleged, pending, unconfirmed sources, and no reason for public alarm. The prophet had become very good at refusing panic while helping it circulate. "Arrested," Harry said. "Actually arrested?" "Late yesterday," said Tonks. Her hair, which had been a defiant electric pink when he first came down to the kitchen on previous mornings, had settled today into a dull brownish auburn that matched her mood. Bones pushed it through. Fudge signed off because he thought he'd look strong, then discovered strength occasionally has consequences. Remus folded his hands. "It isn't about the graveyard," he said, anticipating Harry's next thought. "At least, not openly. The charges are built around the long trail he's left through dark artifacts and old connections. Things the Ministry can acknowledge without admitting Voldemort is back." "No." Harry felt the old flare of frustration. "So they'll arrest a Death Eater, but still call me mad if I say Voldemort returned." Moody gave a harsh grunt that might have been laughter. "Ministry'll swallow arsenic before it swallows pride, boy." Sirius leaned back in his chair. "Still, it hurts them. Lucius was useful. That's why he always slithered around the edges of things. He knew where power sat and how to whisper to it. Nah, ganda. At the far end of the table, Dumbledore was pouring tea with the calm of a man who had expected the morning precisely as it had arrived. Harry had not seen much of him since leaving school. Dumbledore's presence still had the odd effect of making every room seem larger and more ordered than it had a right to be. But Harry could not yet forgive the distance he had felt from him these last months. The hurt of Cedric's death still lived close under his skin, and Dumbledore's kindness, when it appeared, had taken on a solemnity Harry almost resented. "Professor," Harry said, "is it good?" Dumbledore set down the teapot. The lamplight picked out silver in his beard and the tired intelligence in his eyes. "It is not simple enough to be wholly good, Harry, but it is significant." That was exactly the sort of answer Harry least wanted. Sirius saw his expression and smirked. "Meaning yes, but with complications." Dumbledore's mouth twitched. "Meaning that Lucius Malfoy represented a kind of connection Lord Voldemort values. Wealth, respectability, access. Men like him allowed dark causes to dress themselves in the language of order. Remove such a man, and you do not destroy the threat, but you may alter its shape." Harry stared at the prophet again, and in the crackling pause that followed, he remembered Lucius in the Department of Mysteries from his dreams and fears before they had happened, though not yet in fact. He remembered Lucius in the bookshop years earlier sneering at the Weasleys. He remembered him at Hogwarts slipping Tom Riddle's diary into Ginny's cauldron with smiling malice, though no one had been able to prove it in the way adults seemed to insist upon before acting. There were people, Harry had learned, whose evil never announced itself as murder in a corridor. It hid in gifts, in favors, in introductions, in the quiet placing of poison into the hands of children. "Then why do I feel like this means something worse is coming?" Harry asked. Moody's magical eye whirled toward him. "Because you're learning." No one rebuked Moody, which meant he was probably right. The rest of the article described a continuing investigation and quoted unnamed ministry officials insisting there was no evidence of wider instability. Sirius snorted at that and reached for the marmalade with a violence that made the spoon clatter. He had not been in a good mood for weeks. Grimmauld Place chafed at him. The old family house, full of dead opinions and lingering curses, suited his history better than his temperament. Harry sometimes thought Sirius was most alive when angry and most endangered when still. "Lucius in Azkaban," Sirius said. "That will sting the old set. They all spent years pretending the war had been an unfortunate misunderstanding. Harder to do when one of your own is dragged off in front of his peacocks." "No." Tonks laughed despite herself. Remus did not. He was watching Dumbledore. "You think it may push the others into the open. I think fear tends to clarify loyalties," said Dumbledore. Harry looked from one to the other. "So what do we do?" For a moment no one answered. Outside the kitchen walls the house seemed to settle deeper into itself. Pipes muttering. Old wood sigh. Creature could be heard distantly abusing a saucepan in tones of ancestral bitterness. "Ain't present," said Dumbledore. "We observe, we listen, we strengthen what bonds we can." He turned his gaze to Harry. "And we try not to let our enemies decide the rhythm of our movements." Harry understood some of that and disliked the rest. Observe. Listen. Wait. Since the graveyard, he had felt as though adults were forever asking him to exist in the corridor outside the room where important things happened. Voldemort had returned. Cedric was dead. He himself had witnessed it, had lived through it, And yet much of the summer had consisted of being protected from explanations as if ignorance were a blanket. He dropped the paper. "Malfoy won't stay there, will he?" Sirius' answer came first. "Probably not forever." "Not forever," Dumbledore agreed, "but perhaps long enough." There it was again, the sense that adults measured time differently, that a month, a season, a school year could all be pieces on a board. Harry felt a surge of resentment and did not know where to set it down. He pushed back from the table slightly. Long enough for what? Dumbledore regarded him with that grave attention which could feel more exposing than accusation. Long enough for Lord Voldemort to be deprived of one of the men who best knows how to shape polite society to cruel ends. Long enough for certain families to hesitate. Long enough for those who have been quietly aiding him to wonder whether they too can be touched. And if they decide to help him harder because they're scared. "That," said Remus softly, "is the complication." Breakfast went on in fragments after that. Moody left for headquarters. Tonks was sent on a message run. Sirius and Remus fell into a low discussion about old names in the ministry, and who might already be compromised. Harry remained where he was longer than he meant to, rereading the article until the words blurred. Lucius Malfoy in prison. It ought to have felt like justice, at least a little. It ought to have brightened something. Instead, it made the world feel off balance in a new way. Later, as the day moved on through the stale dimness of the house, Harry found himself alone in the drawing room with Sirius. Dust hung in the curtains. The mounted house elves' heads glimmered faintly in the corridor beyond whenever the door was ajar, making the whole place feel like a mausoleum pretending to be a residence. Sirius was by the window, though the curtains were barely parted and offered only a sliver of gray London sky. "You're thinking too loudly," he said without turning. Harry sat in the armchair nearest the fire. "Can you do that now? On you?" "Usually." Harry hesitated. Then, because Sirius at least never answered him like a schoolmaster when he did not want one, he said, "I keep thinking about Draco." That made Sirius glance around. "Draco? Yeah, I hate him, obviously. Healthy instinct. But..." Harry frowned. "If your dad got arrested and taken to Azkaban..." Sirius' expression altered. "Not much. Just enough." Harry wished at once he had phrased it differently, or not at all. Sirius let out a long breath. "You're not wrong to think of it." Harry stared at the dead embers in the grate. "He'd still deserve it, wouldn't he?" Lucius died. "Nah." "Yes," said Sirius. "And Draco can still be a nasty little Torag while also being 15 and frightened." He moved away from the window and sat opposite Harry, long legs stretched out, dark hair falling untidily into his face. "That's one of the things no one tells you when you're young. Villains rarely arrive with no one waiting for them at home." Harry thought of Dudley as a younger child, crying when a bee stung him. He thought of Malfoy and Madame Malkin, smug and sneering before Harry had known who he was. He thought of Mr. Weasley, kindly and baffled and earnest. Fathers were not equal. That did not stop them being fathers. "Did you ever think your parents could be wrong?" Harry asked. Sirius laughed once without amusement. "Constantly. Though in my family one had to define wrong. My mother thought weakness was wrong. My father thought disobedience was wrong. Bellatrix thought mercy was wrong. I found myself becoming rather attached to wrongness in general." Harry smiled despite himself. Sirius leaned his head back. "Draco will be angry. Anger's easier than shame. Easier than fear. Especially for boys brought up to think their surname is armor." "Nay." Harry said nothing. He remembered Draco on the train in first year, offering friendship as though granting a favor. He remembered every jeer since. It was difficult to picture fear inside Malfoy. But then, Harry thought, it had been difficult once to picture fear inside Sirius too. The clock on the mantel ticked. After a while, Sirius said, "There's another thing." "What?" "If Lucius is in Azkaban, someone else will try to take his place." Harry looked up. "That's how their sort works," Sirius said. "You don't get rid of a place at the table. You just empty the chair." The sentence stayed with Harry all day. It remained when he went to bed in the old room with the moth-eaten hangings and woke again in darkness after dreaming of stone corridors and a silver mask being lowered into black water. It remained when he imagined Hogwarts and the coming term and the ordinary, blessed nonsense of lessons, gossip, Quidditch, homework. And when, just before dawn, he drifted again into uneasy sleep, it followed him into a dream in which a high-backed chair at a long table stood empty, while voices whispered from the dark around it, each eager to sit. By the time the Hogwarts Express arrived in September, Lucius Malfoy had been in Azkaban nearly 7 weeks. That fact, which Harry had imagined might fade behind newer dramas, instead seemed to have soaked into the school itself. Hogwarts always took news and transformed it, not merely into rumor, but into weather. Scandals became drafts under doors, moods in corridors, currents running beneath the ordinary business of spells and homework. This one entered with the students and settled over the castle by the first evening feast. Draco walked into the great hall with Crabbe and Goyle half a pace behind him as usual, but the arrangement looked wrong now. Before, it had conveyed a kind of juvenile princeling authority, a peacock's mockery of a bodyguard. Now it looked like what it was, a boy using bulk as a shield. The room noticed. Hundreds of eyes noticed. Harry saw heads lean together up and down the house tables. He heard the word Azkaban before he even sat down. Ron stared openly. Blimey. Hermione kicked him under the table. Don't gawk. I'm not gawking, I'm observing. You're gawking. Harry kept his eyes on Draco long enough to see the exact instant Malfoy realized everyone was looking at him differently. Not with the irritated amusement reserved for school rivals. Not with ordinary dislike. With fascination. With calculation. With pity from some, which was probably the worst of all. Draco's face hardened at once into something brittle and superior. Harry knew that look. It was the look Malfoy always used when reality offended him. He knows, Harry muttered. Ron snorted. What gave it away? The fact he looks like someone's just told him his hair's gone dark? No. At the Slytherin table, Pansy Parkinson leaned close to Draco as if to ask something. He answered without turning his head. She recoiled a little, then laughed too brightly, covering whatever awkwardness had passed between them. Further along, Theodore Nott watched in silence. Blaise Zabini, newly in the year and already wearing beauty like an insult, looked faintly entertained. The younger Slytherins, who had always treated Draco like a future they might attach themselves to, seemed uncertain whether proximity now offered prestige or contamination. Above them, the enchanted ceiling was darkening into a velvet September night. Candles floated. The first years stared and forgot, briefly, the politics of older students. Hagrid beamed from the staff table. Professor McGonagall wore her usual expression of organized disapproval. Snape might as well have been carved from black stone. Dumbledore rose and welcomed them back with his old warmth. But even his voice could not quite smooth over the sharpened air. Harry ate little. He found himself repeatedly glancing toward Draco against his own will. And each time Malfoy seemed somehow smaller without physically being so. Still pale. Still fine-boned. Still disdainful. But the disdain had become active labor, something he was using to hold himself together. After the feast, when the students spilled into corridors and stairwells, the first skirmish of the term broke out before the moving staircase to the second floor. It began not with Harry or Ron, but with Seamus Finnegan, who had acquired over the summer a complicated resentment toward Harry from the Prophet's campaign about the graveyard and Dumbledore's supposed instability. He had already been prickly at dinner. Now, perhaps eager to win back some imagined normalcy through cruelty aimed elsewhere, he called across the crowd, "Malfoy, has your dad sent for decorating tips? I hear the Azkaban walls are a bit plain." The corridor erupted in laughter. Not all of it cruel, much of it nervous. School laughter was often an effort to avoid being noticed by pain. Draco stopped dead. Crabbe and Goyle halted with him. The staircases creaked overhead. "What did you say?" Draco asked. Seamus, who had probably not expected a response, swallowed, and found himself committed by pride. I said maybe he can brighten the place with some peacocks. Even Ron winced. Draco's hand flew to his wand. In the same heartbeat Harry's did too, along with half the corridors. There was a moment of pure school chaos, not yet action but the certainty of it. And then Snape's voice cracked through the stone passage like a whip. "What?" he said. "Is the meaning of this?" Everyone froze. Draco turned at once, his expression changing with such speed that Harry would almost have admired it if he had not despised the source. "Professor Finnegan insulted my family." Seamus went red. "I only said—" "You," said Snape, fixing him with a gaze capable of removing skin. "Will lose 20 points from Gryffindor for provocation." Ron exploded. "That's mental, he." "Another 10 for speaking out of turn, Weasley." Harry felt anger rise hot in him, clean and familiar. Yet before he could join in, Snape looked at Draco, and something flickered there that Harry had never seen before. Not affection, not even favoritism as simple as before. Something sharper. Appraisal, perhaps? Warning. "And you, Mr. Malfoy," Snape said softly, "will remember that public scenes do not improve private difficulties." The corridor went very still. For a second, Draco looked almost naked. Then the mask slammed down again. "Yes, Professor." Snape swept away in a swirl of black robes. The crowd dispersed in the uneven, murmuring fashion of people disappointed to have been denied blood. Seamus cursed under his breath. Lavender Brown whispered fiercely to Parvati. Dean pulled Seamus off by the sleeve before anything else could be said. Ron muttered about Snape's bias, but Harry barely heard him. Public scenes do not improve private difficulties. It was a peculiar thing for Snape to say. Peculiar because it admitted the existence of those difficulties at all. Peculiar because it sounded almost like counsel. Hermione, who missed very little, glanced at Harry as they climbed the stairs. He could tell by the set of her mouth that she had noticed it too. That night, the common room buzzed with competing pleasures and discomforts. Some students thought Malfoy's humiliation hilarious. Others found it distasteful. A few were frightened by what it suggested, that the war adults kept refusing to name had already reached far enough into their world to stain a boy at the dinner table. Harry sat by the fire with a book open and unread. Neville was doing homework beside him with a determined squint. Ginny chatted with some fourth years across the room, but Harry caught her glancing over now and then, perhaps remembering the diary and what the name Malfoy meant in ways most of the school never would. When the common room thinned and the hour grew late, Harry took the long route up to the dormitory by the corridor, overlooking the grounds. The windows were black mirrors. The lawns beyond were silvered faintly by moonlight. He had almost reached the staircase when he heard voices from the far archway. One was Draco's. Harry stopped at once and moved closer, soundlessly, years of avoiding Filch and Mrs. Norris making stealth nearly instinctive. The other voice was lower, controlled. "Snape, you are behaving badly," Snape said. "People are laughing at me. They are students. Students laugh at breathing." There was a pause. Then Draco said with sudden ugliness, "You don't know what it's like." Harry risked a glance around the column. Draco stood with one shoulder against the wall, pale head bowed just enough to make him seem younger. Snape faced him, hands folded in his sleeves. "No?" Snape asked. Draco flushed. "I didn't mean—" "I am aware," said Snape. "Of many things." Draco's mouth tightened. "Mother says the lawyers are delaying. Bones keeps adding things. They say Father may have to stay until winter at least. Your mother is doing what she can." "And what are you doing?" Harry felt the shock of the question as if it had been put to him. Snape did not answer immediately. "What I can," he said at last. Draco gave a bitter little laugh. "That means nothing." "It means," Snape said quietly, "that you will not worsen matters by drawing attention to yourself. You will not issue threats in corridors. You will not posture for idiots. And you will not mistake the curiosity of children for the judgment of the world." "Done." Draco looked away. "Easy for you to say." "No," said Snape, and for one astonishing second something almost like naked history showed in his face. Not easy. Harry should have left. He knew that. Instead he stayed, pinned by the strangeness of seeing Draco, not as a tormentor, but as a frightened boy snapping at the one adult he half-trusted. What if they don't let him out? Draco asked. Snape's expression closed again. Then your task remains the same, which is to survive this year without becoming more foolish than you already are. Draco huffed a sound that might have been a laugh if misery had not choked it halfway. Snape stepped closer, lowering his voice beyond what Harry could hear clearly. He caught only fragments. Your mother. Eyes upon the family. Hold your tongue. The Dark Lord. Then the rest too soft to make out. Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the corridor draft. The Dark Lord. Snape moved back, and the moment was gone. Bed, Draco. Yes, Professor. Harry retreated at once, heart hammering. By the time Draco came up the staircase toward the Slytherin dungeons below, and Snape flowed away into the dark, Harry was safely in the dormitory, staring at the canopy over his bed, and feeling the castle shift again around him. Lucius Malfoy might be in prison. Draco might be mocked. But whatever connections bound that family to deeper things had not dissolved with the click of a cell door. In the weeks that followed, the evidence accumulated in small ways. Draco's temper worsened. His insults grew less imaginative and more vicious, as if anger had stripped him down to his essentials. He still sneered at Harry in corridors, still spat mudblood at Hermione when he dared, still clung to the habits of superiority. Yet, cracks showed. He missed a catch in their first Quidditch practice and nearly fell off his broom. He started twice when a ministry owl arrived at breakfast, though it turned out to be for Professor Vector. He spent more time with Snape than before, or seemed to, vanishing after dinner only to reappear with his face composed and unreadable. Once in potions, while Snape prowled the desks and ordered them through an antidote exercise, Harry glanced up and found Draco staring at the steaming cauldron, as if he had forgotten where he was. His face was nearly colorless. "Malfoy," said Snape sharply. Draco started. "Sir, if you intend to poison us all, do be original." A few Slytherins laughed. Draco gave the required smirk, but Harry saw the hand at his ladle shaking. Even Ron noticed eventually. "He's gone weird." "He was already weird," Harry said. "You know what I mean." Hermione, chopping soporiferous beans with unnecessary force, said, "Trauma doesn't improve character." Ron blinked. "You can't seriously be defending him." "I'm not defending him. I'm observing. There is a difference." Harry said nothing. He had become used, against his preferences, to holding two truths at once. Draco Malfoy was cruel. Draco Malfoy was suffering. The one did not cancel the other. If anything, it made the world more difficult, which Harry felt was an unfair habit reality had acquired. By October, the entire school had learned the rhythm of Draco's new life. Whispers followed him. Owls from home were devoured in secret. He laughed too loudly when he laughed at all. And over everything loomed the unspoken knowledge that Lucius Malfoy, polished tyrant of the Old Order, remained behind bars while winter gathered in the mountains, and the war refused to stay politely outside the school gates. The night Narcissa went to Spinner's End, the rain had teeth in it. She traveled without house elves and without the protections Lucius would once have insisted upon, because secrecy had become more valuable than dignity. The village lay crouched by the Black River like something half abandoned by ordinary life. Its rows of brick houses leaned toward one another as if conspiring. Broken chimneys scratched at the low sky. There was no softness here. No peacocks, no silver gates, no polished stone holding ancestral chill. Narcissa disliked it on sight, which was part of why she trusted it as a place for this meeting. She raised her hand to knock only once. The door opened before her knuckles touched wood. Severus stood there in black candlelight, drawing hollows in his face. He had always looked more at home in narrow, joyless places than in drawing rooms. Some men carried poverty out of youth like a wound. Others, made it into a kind of weapon. Severus had done both. "You were followed?" he asked. "No." "Come in." She entered a front room crowded by shadows and shelves. The air smelled faintly of damp wool, old books, and something medicinal simmering deeper in the house. A fire burned low. Bellatrix was there already, seated but not at ease, one gloved hand tapping her knee. Her dark hair fell wildly about her pale face. Azkaban had not diminished her. If anything, it had stripped away what little remained of ordinary humanity and left behind a fervor almost holy in its violence. Narcissa stopped short. "You said this was private." Bellatrix smiled. "It was all teeth. From some people." Severus shut the door. Bella insisted. "I insisted because family ought not hide from family in a time like this." Narcissa nearly turned back then. Bellatrix, in recent weeks, had become less sister than instrument. She had once possessed wit, mischief, a kind of aristocratic ferocity Narcissa could understand even when she disliked it. Azkaban had changed the proportions. Now devotion to the Dark Lord seemed to burn through Bellatrix from within, leaving little space for anything else, except flashes of old blood loyalty. She loved Narcissa perhaps in the way a fanatic loves a relic from the life that existed before the revelation. Fiercely, but not sanely. "I did not come to discuss family sentiment," Narcissa said. Bellatrix's eyes glittered. "No, you came to beg." "Enough," said Severus. The word was quiet, but the room obeyed it. Narcissa had never trusted him fully, not even when Lucius did. Severus was useful, formidable, indispensable at times, but not trustworthy in the way one trusted a husband or sister or blood oath. He belonged too much to his own silences. Yet now, with Lucius imprisoned and the Dark Lord displeased and Draco unraveling at school, Severus was one of the few men left in Britain who could move between worlds without immediately showing which one stained him deepest. Narcissa removed her gloves slowly, buying herself composure. "Lucius remains in Azkaban. Bones has extended the inquiry. Fudge is weak. The solicitors say every time they think they have found a path, another statement appears or another asset is frozen. This is not merely legal inconvenience. It is pressure." Bellatrix leaned forward. "Then Lucius should endure it. Many have endured worse for the Dark Lord." No, Palya, Kasi. Dainshine, Do, Kawa." Narcissa turned on her sister with a coldness that would once have ended drawing-room conversations for good. "Do not speak to me of endurance as if prison were a jewel to admire upon another woman's throat." Bellatrix rose halfway, face sharpening, but Severus interposed himself with one glance. "The question," he said, "is what the Dark Lord intends." Narcissa looked at him. "And do you know?" His pause was answer enough. Bellatrix laughed, delighted by the tension in the room. "He intends victory, of course." I asked about Lucius, and I answered. Narcissa could have struck her. Instead, she faced Severus again. "Draco is receiving letters, not from Lucius." That drew Bellatrix full attention. "What others?" "Men who once supped at our table. Men who are suddenly eager to ask after his studies, his friendships, his resolve." Severus's expression darkened by a degree. "Names?" "I burned the last 2 letters." "Foolish," Bellatrix said. "Necessary," Narcissa replied. "I will not leave my son's future in ink." Bellatrix moved toward the hearth, restless, almost exultant. Perhaps the boy is being measured. It is time he understood what blood requires. "What blood requires," Narcissa said, each word sharpened to glass, "is that my son not be fed to a cause before he is grown." Bellatrix spun on her. "You speak as though service is devouring." "For boys, it often is." The sisters stood facing one another in the low firelight, and for an instant Severus saw the whole tragic map of the House of Black written in them. Bellatrix, the elder branch gone to poison, Grandeur turned rabid. Narcissa? The colder beauty of survival. The branch that bent because it intended to remain standing. Each proud. Each dangerous. Each certain the other had betrayed the true shape of family. Severus said, "The Dark Lord values the Malfoys." Bellatrix smiled instantly. "There, you see? He values useful things," Narcissa said. No one contradicted her. That was the most frightening moment of the night. Rain ticked at the panes. Somewhere upstairs the house settled. The fire gave a soft collapse in the grate. Narcissa lowered her voice. "Lucius may survive Azkaban. He may even recover his position in time. But Draco is 15. He has lost all sense of what is performance and what is danger. He wants to defend his father. He wants to prove he is not afraid. And there are people around him who will find that very convenient." Severus was silent a long moment. Then, "I have seen signs of it." Bellatrix's mouth tightened. "Good. Good," Narcissa repeated. Bellatrix spread her hands, black lace at the wrists. "What did you imagine, sissy? That we would preserve him forever in glass? He is a Malfoy. He is a black by blood through you. He is not meant for a soft life while history is being written." "Nay, he is meant," Narcissa said. And now, for the first time, true feeling broke through the marble of her manor. "To live." Bellatrix's eyes widened almost tenderly. "Ah, there you are." Narcissa hated that her sister had seen the exposed thing. Severus turned away as if studying the fire, but in truth he was thinking rapidly. Lucius imprisoned. Narcissa afraid. Bellatrix eager. Draco unstable. Voldemort impatient. These were ingredients of catastrophe, and catastrophe had a way of reaching for schoolboys, because they were small enough to be moved, and grand enough to be sacrificed symbolically. "The Dark Lord has not yet assigned the boy any formal task," he said carefully. Bellatrix looked displeased. "Yet." Narcissa gripped the back of a chair. "Can you keep it that way?" Severus met her gaze. "Perhaps. Perhaps. You ask for certainty where none exists." She drew in a breath through her nose. "Then tell me what exists." He considered how much truth to give. Too much, and he endangered more than himself. Too little, and she would leave to seek protection elsewhere, perhaps from people far less capable or more reckless. "The Dark Lord did not plan for Lucius to be removed from play this early," he said at last. "It has forced adjustments. Certain operations must now be entrusted to less subtle hands." Bellatrix smiled as if this were praise. "Which means," Severus continued, "that he is dissatisfied. Dissatisfied men often look for symbols, not only solutions. A son may be asked to redeem a father in the eyes of a master." "Nay." Narcissa closed her eyes once. It was the nearest thing to collapse Severus had ever seen in her. When she opened them again, fear had been hammered flat into purpose. "If that happens," she said, "you will help him." Bellatrix moved at once. "What does that mean?" "It means," said Severus, turning cold again, "what I choose it to mean." For a heartbeat it seemed Bellatrix might draw her wand. Instead she laughed, thrilled by tension as lesser people were thrilled by music. "Always the spider in the corner, Severus." "And you," he said, "always the torch dropped in dry grass." Narcissa released his arm only when she had wrung from the silence all certainty she could. If not enough, it would never be enough. But motherhood, she had learned, was the art of building fortifications out of things too weak to deserve the name. When at last she prepared to leave, Bellatrix caught her at the door. "Sissy," she said. Sudden softness in the word. Sudden memory of girlhood corridors and whispered schemes in a different house before it ruined them all. "Do not mistake fear for wisdom." Narcissa drew up her hood. "And do not mistake obedience for faith." She left before Bellatrix could answer. The rain struck her face like cold needles. Spinner's End vanished behind her as she disapparated, carrying with her no comfort at all, Only the knowledge that the world around Draco was narrowing into the sort of trap that began by flattering a boy's pride and ended by burying his name beneath a father's sins. Inside the house, Bellatrix turned to Severus with fury bright in her eyes. "You indulge her. I manage her. She weakens the family." "No," Severus said. "She preserves what remains of it." Bellatrix sneered. "Preserve. Protect. Delay. Those are the prayers of people who have forgotten what greatness costs." "Nay, and key." Severus looked at her and thought of prison, obsession, devotion sharpened into self-erasure. "On the contrary," he said, "I think they are often spoken by the people who know exactly what it costs." Bellatrix smiled again, but there was danger now. "You always did prefer your wars through curtains and corners, and you always preferred them with witnesses." The sisters' quarrel lingered in the room after Narcissa vanished. The fire hissed. The river outside moved black and patient under the rain. Far away, in a tower cell above the sea, Lucius Malfoy slept badly and dreamed of a drawing room with no doors. Winter came hard that year, and with it came the visions. Harry had hoped, foolishly, and because hope sometimes made a habit of foolishness, that the term might settle into some warped version of normal. Classes continued. Quidditch suffered. Umbridge arrived and spread her pink poison through the school. Fudge, though shaken by the Malfoy affair, clung to denial like a drowning man to driftwood. Lucius's arrest had not made him brave. It had merely made him defensive. Dumbledore became, in the Ministry's preferred narrative, not a man warning of catastrophe, but a manipulator exploiting public nerves. Harry became a liar with famous scars. The machine of contempt rolled on because institutions often found it easier to crush truth than to rearrange themselves around it. Yet, beneath that familiar ugliness, other changes gathered. The people Harry later saw in the Department of Mysteries were not organized the way they had been in older versions of the future that might have happened. There was no Lucius to take command with aristocratic froidure, no polished voice arranging brutality into efficient shapes. Instead, the trap around Harry that spring was built with less precision and more hunger. The dreams that lured him toward the Hall of Prophecy came fevered and ragged, contaminated by Bellatrix's excitement, by the brute impatience of men unaccustomed to subtle planning, by Voldemort's own frustration pressing through the bond between his mind and Harry's scar. Hermione noticed the difference first. "They're sloppier," she said after one night when Harry woke shaking in the dormitory, certain he had seen a corridor flood with dark robes and heard laughter where there should have been silence. "Your dreams used to feel exact. These sound mad," said Ron. "Chaotic," Hermione corrected. Harry, sitting on the edge of his bed with sweat cooling on his skin, pressed a hand to his scar. "It was still the Department of Mysteries. I know it was." Hermione's face was pale but determined. "Knowing the place doesn't mean the dream itself is honest. That distinction saved lives." Still, when the false vision came at last of Sirius Black tortured in the Ministry, terror overran reason nearly to the same degree as before. Harry felt it in the marrow, a certainty so absolute it left no room for logic. The image of Sirius bound and shouting, the gleam of black stone, the cold triumph in the dark around him, all of it struck with the force of memory rather than fantasy. By the time Hermione, Ron, Ginny, Neville, and Luna had caught him in the common room and forced the mad plan into a shape at least halfway survivable, Harry was operating on fear and the raw refusal to lose one more person because adults had been too slow. They flew to London on the Strahls through a sky torn by stormlight. Harry remembered very little of the journey clearly afterward. Ginny's hair whipping like flame, Neville gripping too hard with white knuckles, Luna looking calm in a way that made everyone else seem more frantic by contrast. The city below them like a field of dying embers. Then the Ministry, dark and hollow and huge with after-hours silence, opening before them like the mouth of something waiting. The corridor in his dream existed exactly as it had in sleep. The black door, the long run of stone, the breathless pounding of their feet. Harry's heart climbed into his throat as they reached the Hall of Prophecy, and the shelves rose around them into dim infinity, glass globes catching the cold light. He found the sphere bearing his name and Voldemort's, in a moment that felt like fate mocking him for rehearsal. Then the voices came. Not Lucius's cool drawl. Not the easy, cultivated malice Harry had unconsciously expected. Bellatrix's laughter rang first, high and delighted, echoing between the shelves. Shadows detached themselves from deeper shadows. Masks glimmered. Rodolphus Lestrange, Antonin Dolohov, Avery Dyke, McNair. Others less distinguished by face than by menace. Their formation was looser. Their discipline worse. But there were enough of them. Harry felt the exact wrongness of it even before they encircled the children. Without Lucius, the scene had a feral quality, as if wolves had entered a ballroom and found the chandeliers offensive. "Well, well," Bellatrix sang. The boy came anyway. Hermione stepped close enough that Harry could feel her shoulder. "I told you. This changes nothing," Harry whispered. "Oh, but it does," Luna said dreamily. "They're excited. Excited people make mistakes." Bellatrix lifted her wand. "Give us the prophecy, Harry." He tightened his grip on the glass sphere. "Where's Sirius?" That won another peal of laughter. The sound seemed to shake dust from history. "Still too easy," said Bellatrix. "Even without Lucius." Harry's stomach dropped. The admission, tossed away carelessly, confirmed the shape of the trap. He had been lured not by one mind's cold design, but by a coalition of impatient predators. Behind the masks he could feel it. The strain, the competition, the eagerness to distinguish themselves before Voldemort now that one of his old lieutenants sat in prison. It made them more dangerous, perhaps, but also less coherent. "Run," Hermione whispered. Bellatrix heard. Now. Chaos broke. Neville's spell shattered the shelf beside McNair. Ginny's reductor curse exploded glass in a glittering storm. Ron ducked a streak of red light and yelled something inventive and obscene. Luna, serene as moonlight, sent a charm spinning a Death Eater sideways into a tower of prophecies. Harry grabbed Hermione's sleeve and pulled her down one aisle as shelves burst and toppling glass filled the air with silver dust and tiny prophecies dying in whispered breaths. He had imagined, when fear pictured this sort of battle, that it would have a kind of clarity. Heroes and villains, curses and counters, clean choices. But the Hall of Prophecy became instantly a maze of screaming echoes, collisions, and blind terror. Shelves swung up and down. Orbs broke underfoot. Voices disembodied themselves and rebounded from stone until it was impossible to tell direction. Bellatrix shouted orders no one fully obeyed. Dolohov cursed in a language Harry did not know. Ginny cried out somewhere to the left. Hermione's hand found Harry's again and vanished. Then the prophecy broke. Harry never knew whether it was his fall or Dolohov's curse striking the shelf behind him. One moment the sphere was cold and whole in his hands. The next it burst with a sound like ice cracking beneath a lake, and a thin white figure rose from the fragments, speaking words Harry would later remember, only in ragged portions before dissolving into nothing. Silence hit for less than a second. Then Bellatrix screamed. The sound was not frustration alone. It was outrage, religious and personal. Harry saw her face, no mask now, twisted by disbelief. Around her the other Death Eaters hesitated, and in that hesitation Harry understood everything Dumbledore had meant about shape. Lucius would not have let the moment splinter. Lucius would have had contingencies, signals, withdrawal routes. Bellatrix had fury. The others had ambition. The prophecy's destruction had not merely denied Voldemort information, it had torn command out of the room. "Take Potter!" Bellatrix shrieked. They tried. What followed moved too quickly to become narrative until long afterward. The children fled from chamber to chamber through the mysteries below the ministry. Brains writhing in tanks, time broken into shards, doors revolving, darkness behaving like substance. Spells clipped stone and flesh. Ron took a curse that left him laughing terribly among the hanging brains. Hermione fell under Dolohov's attack and lay too still for Harry's soul to remain in his body. Neville's nose streamed blood. Ginny limped, but kept her wand up. Luna moved like someone half listening to another world, and therefore oddly unstartled by this one. And because the Death Eaters were sloppier than in the canon of disaster that might once have been, because they shouted over one another and broke formation and rushed when patience would have won, the Order of the Phoenix reached the battle sooner. They came not as a clean rescue but as an eruption. Sirius first, laughing with savage joy that turned Harry's blood to water. Remus close behind. Tonks, Kingsley, Moody. The room of archways became a war of adults and children, loyalty and fanaticism, old grudges and fresh terror. Harry shouted Sirius' name and nearly got himself killed for it. A curse blasted stone beside his ear. Bellatrix turned on Sirius with a cry that was almost pleasure. Their duel lit the chamber with violent flashes, cousin against cousin in a place where the veil itself trembled. But this time the battle's disorder saved him. Bellatrix, deprived already of the prophecy and maddened by failure, overextended. Sirius fought like a man finally allowed to burn off years of confinement, reckless but brilliant. In the older path of history, perhaps his recklessness would have placed him a heartbeat wrong before the veil. Here, Dolohov collided with Bellatrix's line of movement while trying to strike Kingsley. Her curse went wide. Sirius answered true, not killing but driving her bodily into the stone dais so hard that her wand flew from her hand. Remus reached Harry a moment later, seizing him by the shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "Hermione." "I know." The chamber reeled around them. Moody was shouting. Tonks crawled toward Ginny. Neville, bloodied and half-feral, stood over Hermione with his wand shaking. Sirius had Bellatrix pinned in a ring of broken stone, breathing hard, black hair wild around a face suddenly 10 years younger for being alive in battle. Then the fountain in the level above exploded. The sound carried even down there, the unmistakable crack of power beyond any ordinary duel. Dumbledore had arrived. With him, inevitably, came the collapse of secrecy. Everything after that accelerated toward revelation. Some Death Eaters fled. Some were captured. Bellatrix herself vanished in the confusion after Sirius was forced away to help Harry. The Ministry, once shielded by denial and corridors of procedure, could no longer pretend. Too many witnesses. Too much damage. Too much blood and broken prophecy dust glittering on official floors. And most of all, Voldemort, furious and forced by failure into a riskier visibility than intended, entered the Ministry himself in pursuit of the boy and the prophecy he no longer possessed. Harry saw him in the atrium afterward, not as rumor, not as memory, but as terrible fact. Tall, snake-faced, burning with a rage that went beyond anger into the humiliation of thwarted design. Dumbledore met him there in a blaze of spellcraft that tore statues apart and made the very air shudder. Fudge arrived in time not to stop anything but to witness the ruin of his own denial. Later, long after St. Mungo's and explanations and the shaking aftermath in which Hermione lived, Sirius survived, and the world finally admitted aloud what Harry had been saying since June. Harry would think back to the Hall of Prophecy and understand that one arrest months earlier had echoed even there. Lucius's absence had not made the trap harmless. It had made it less controlled, more jagged, more hungry. And in jaggedness there had been room, narrow, bloody room, for survival. Cornelius Fudge spent the hours before dawn in a room with no windows and discovered, too late, the difference between inconvenience and history. He had been brought there white-faced from the atrium, spectacles askew, robes torn at one sleeve by flying stone. He had arrived at the battle's end carrying all the defensive instincts of a man who expected to find some theatrical misunderstanding arranged by Albus Dumbledore for political effect. Instead, he had seen Lord Voldemort himself, unmistakable in shape and horror, vanish before a dozen witnesses after a duel that had turned the Ministry's grand atrium into a wreck of shattered marble and scorched enchantments. Now he sat at a narrow table while Amelia Bones stood opposite him with the patience of execution. "You knew," Fudge said for the third time, and with each repetition the accusation weakened because it had nowhere solid to land. You and Dumbledore, you must have known this would force matters. Amelia had removed her outer cloak. She looked tired, harder than tired but steady. We knew only that denial would not prevent reality from arriving. You pursued Malfoy, Fudge said. You stirred the old families, and then this. She leaned forward slightly. Lucius Malfoy is in Azkaban because evidence warranted it. Lord Voldemort is back because he returned. Those facts are not causes of one another merely because you find them inconvenient in sequence. Fudge opened and closed his mouth. His political instincts, so dependable in smaller crises, kept reaching for phrases and finding them suddenly too thin. Reframe. Delay. Issue a committee. Condemn extremism on all sides. Yet the image of Voldemort's face cut through every available euphemism like a knife through paper. Rufus Scrimgeour, lion-maned and battle-scarred, stood near the door with two senior Aurors. He had not spoken much, which was ominous. Scrimgeour had the look of a man whose respect for civilian leadership ended exactly where incompetence began. Dumbledore was elsewhere in the building, conferring with healers, the Order, and several officials whose private loyalties were now being examined with a new and brutal seriousness. Harry Potter had seen enough to confirm everything. So had Kingsley. So had half the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The old lie was dead, and lying dead beside it, in a more complicated sense, was Lucius Malfoy's previous usefulness. Amelia understood that perhaps before anyone else in the Ministry did. She had seen the battle reports. She knew which Death Eaters had appeared, which had not, who had led badly, who had panicked when the prophecy shattered. She knew the enemy had come on sooner and less elegantly than expected, with Bellatrix in a frenzy where colder command might have served better. That did not make them weak. It made them volatile. Voldemort, deprived of one of his principal instruments of social corruption, had begun drawing harder upon zeal and terror. Britain was no safer for it. But it was different, and in difference lay opportunity as well as danger. Fudge rubbed at his face with trembling hands. What is the prophet saying? That you were present when he, who must not be named, was witnessed in the atrium. A flash of primitive horror passed through him. Not at Voldemort. At the sentence, the print, the public fact. Amelia felt no pity. Cornelius, she said, and for the first time all night used his given name. The country has just crossed a threshold. You may still choose whether you walk through it with what dignity remains to you. He stared at her. You mean resign? I mean stop treating office like a hiding place. Outside the room, the Ministry was changing by the minute. Messages flew. Flues ignited in rapid sequence. Security protocols were redrafted with shaking hands. Old files long buried under administrative comfort were pulled out and reopened. The Aurors, underfunded, frustrated, frequently obstructed for months by political caution, began to move with a grim energy that bordered on fury. People who had laughed at Harry Potter were suddenly finding him discussed in tones reserved for prophetic witnesses and survivors of shipwreck. And in private drawing rooms across Wizarding Britain, families who had watched Lucius Malfoy's arrest with haughty disapproval now felt the earth open beneath them. If Voldemort was truly back, Lucius's imprisonment ceased to look like an isolated scandal and became instead an omen. Names once protected by old compromise might be dragged into the light one by one. By morning, every corridor of the Ministry smelled of dust, hot metal, fear, and overbrewed tea. Amelia moved through it without ceremony. Scrimgeour joined her near the lifts. You have become unpopular among the old guard. She gave him a sidelong glance. Only now? He almost smiled. There will be pressure to release Malfoy. Not less. More. His friends will argue the opposite now, that his arrest weakens necessary alliances among influential families in a time of crisis. Power. Influential families can begin by not supporting terrorists. Scrimgeour's expression hardened into something like approval. You should have been minister years ago. Say that louder. Cornelius may hear and faint. Yet the joke, such as it was, masked a truth both of them understood. Power vacuums opened quickly in wartime. Fudge had survived on drift and fear of change. Those resources were now exhausted. Someone would have to direct the ministry not merely in posture but in substance. Scrimgeour had the support of the Aurors and the public appetite for a hard hand. Amelia had legal credibility and the rare advantage of already having been right. "Bones," said Scrimgeour, lowering his voice. "If I move on the old networks, the ones shielded by donor lists and school ties, I will need your evidence on Malfoy and those connected to him. You'll have it. And if they come for you." She looked down the corridor where clerks hurried past with stacks of parchment. Owls beat at high windows, and two cursebreakers argued over the containment of damaged magical residue from the atrium. Then they come. That afternoon she visited Azkaban. The sea was iron-colored under a sky like wet ash. Dementors still circled the fortress, though no one who had seen recent months doubted where many of their deeper sympathies lay. Amelia descended the long stone way with two Aurors and the sort of fatigue that left the body feeling built of wire. Lucius was brought to the interview chamber in prison black, thinner already, though the diminution made him, if anything, more severe. He sat opposite her without greeting. "Madam Bones," he said, "have you come to congratulate yourself? I've come to inform you that Lord Voldemort was witnessed publicly at the ministry last night. For the first time since his arrest, Lucius Malfoy lost control of his expression completely. Not because the fact shocked him, because of what it implied." Amelia saw understanding spread through him like a stain. The prophecy mission had failed. Voldemort had moved openly. The ministry had seen. And Lucius himself, who should have been at the center of those consequences, remained trapped in a room that smelled faintly of rust and cold stone. "He came himself," she said, "which suggests things did not go to plan." Lucius recovered enough to sneer. "You imagine yourself a strategist now?" "I imagine nothing. I observe." His eyes narrowed. "And what do you want from me?" "That depends on whether you intend to remain merely a loyal inconvenience to your master, or whether prison has improved your perspective." The insult struck because it was dressed as bureaucracy. Lucius leaned back. "You truly think I would speak to you?" "I think Azkaban lengthens many reflections." His mouth curled. "Then, permit me one. You have no idea what you are standing against." "No idea." Amelia held his gaze. "I know enough to stand against it anyway." Silence stretched. Somewhere beyond the chamber walls, the sea struck rock in slow violence. Lucius looked older in that light. Not weak, not repentant, but aware in a new way of time. His imprisonment had not broken him, yet it had displaced him from the central current of events, and men like Lucius endured humiliation less well than pain. He could bear suffering if it preserved his sense of significance. Irrelevance was another matter. When he spoke again, his tone had altered subtly. "If the ministry truly witnessed him, then Britain is about to remember what it chose to forget. That will not make your side noble. It will only make everyone reveal themselves faster." "Perhaps," said Amelia. "You think the old families will flock to you because you arrested one of their own? No, they will tighten. They will close ranks. Men who disliked Lucius will still defend the principle that names like his must not be caged by names like yours." Amelia almost smiled. "That may be the first honest thing you've said to me." Lucius's eyes flashed. She stood. "Your hearing remains scheduled for next week. In light of recent events, I will oppose bail more vigorously than before." "You mistake me," he said softly. "I am not asking for freedom." That made her pause. "I am warning you," Lucius went on, "that imprisonment has not removed me from the board as fully as you hoped. There are people outside these walls who owe me old debts, carry my favors, or hate my enemies more than they love themselves. And every day you keep me here while the country burns, you create in them not caution but appetite." "Hey." Amelia considered him. "That sounds very like a confession that your influence rests on corruption." "It rests," Lucius said, On reality. She left without replying. Back in London, the political tide rolled over Cornelius Fudge within days. His public statements, once crafted to preserve calm, now sounded to the nation like the babbling of a man who had mistaken blindness for leadership. He did not resign immediately. Cowardice often clung hardest at the brink, but resignation became no longer a question of principle and only of schedule. The prophet shifted with its usual lack of shame. Yesterday's dangerous rumors became today's urgent truths. Harry Potter, from hysterical child to tragically burdened young witness, was rehabilitated in print with nauseating speed. Dumbledore, inconveniently correct, returned to a position of reluctant centrality. The ministry began calling meetings with the order it had mocked. And somewhere deep in the machinery of all this, Amelia Bones kept Lucius Malfoy in his cell. That decision reverberated outward. Not immediately in ways the public could see, but in the weeks after the Department of Mysteries, Bellatrix grew more erratic. Certain pure-blood houses sent contradictory messages. Severus found himself making ever more delicate adjustments in his reports. Draco received a letter from home that left his hands shaking so badly he set fire by accident to the corner of a tapestry in the Slytherin common room. And Voldemort, confronted by the brute truth that fear alone could not yet substitute for network and polish, began to demand from his followers not merely service, but symbolic restitution. The debt of the father was beginning to slide inch by inch toward the son. When Draco came home for Christmas, Malfoy Manor no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a performance of one. The house was unchanged in all outward respects. The peacocks still wandered the frozen lawns like displaced scraps of moon. The drawing room still smelled of wax and old polish. Servants still appeared at the edge of sight and vanished before one needed to notice them. But Lucius's absence had altered the proportions of things. The manor no longer seemed governed by a single will, arranging beauty and intimidation into one seamless order. Instead, it was a collection of elegant rooms in which anxiety had taken up permanent residence. Draco felt it before he saw his mother. He entered through the front hall and heard no music, no conversation, no soft clink of late luncheon. Only the hush of a house listening to itself. His school trunk floated behind him while the house elves bowed too low and avoided his eyes. That annoyed him more than open staring would have done. Narcissa stood in the long west corridor where the family portraits hung, one gloved hand holding a folded letter. She looked exquisite, which was almost infuriating. Grief had sharpened her rather than diminished her. Her dress was winter white, severe at the throat, and the candlelight gave her hair the sheen of old gold under frost. "Draco," she said. He had intended to greet her coolly, with manly composure, because school had made every softer impulse feel treacherous. Instead, the sight of her standing there alone, in the corridor where his father used to receive guests after dinner, brought something hot and humiliating to his chest. He crossed the space quickly. She kissed his cheek. He smelled cold air and expensive perfume and something else beneath it now, tension like singed cloth. "How is school?" she asked. "Vile." A corner of her mouth moved. "Then it remains itself." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he saw the letter in her hand. Not ministry parchment. Not their solicitor's seal. The paper itself seemed to darken the air around it. "Who is it from?" he asked. Narcissa did not answer immediately. "Come to the fire." They went to the drawing room. Lucius's chair remained where it had always been, angled just so beside the hearth, as though any moment he might return to reclaim the room merely by entering it. Draco found he could not look at it for long. Narcissa did not sit in her husband's place. She took the chaise by the window and indicated the settee opposite. When Draco sat, she handed him the letter. He knew the hand. Not precisely, because he had seen it only on a few documents in his life and never on anything meant for him, but knew it by instinct, by the force of what it represented. Long, narrow strokes. Elegant. Cruel. He did not need his mother to tell him from whom it came. His skin went cold. "Read," said Narcissa. He broke the seal. The letter was not long. It did not need to be. Lord Voldemort did not waste phrasing on children unless the waste itself had a purpose. The words commended Draco's bearing under recent family difficulties. They spoke of blood and inheritance and the honor of proving oneself when older men had been unfairly restrained by lesser institutions. They hinted that the House of Malfoy might soon be given an opportunity to demonstrate that its usefulness had not withered simply because its patriarch was temporarily confined. There was no formal task, no detail, only invitation sharpened into expectation. When Draco looked up, the room seemed slightly farther away. "He wrote to me," he said, and even to himself the sentence sounded childish. Narcissa watched him with terrible steadiness. "Yes," Draco swallowed. "That means he still trusts us." "Does it?" He stared at her. "Mother, does it, Draco?" He looked back at the letter. At school he had imagined, in his angrier moods, what it might be to matter truly. To be noticed. To be called upon for something greater than classes and sneers and detentions and the humiliations of ordinary adolescence. In the grand fantasies that pride permitted, his father's imprisonment became the beginning of his own ascendance. Let them whisper. Let them laugh. He would answer them not with excuses, but with importance. He would be chosen. Yet now that the shape of being chosen had arrived in ink, all the fantasies cracked along their hidden seams. Because his mother's face held no triumph. Because the room felt colder. Because beneath the compliments in the letter there lay something else, old and merciless. The suggestion that Lucius Malfoy had failed, and that the family name itself required repair. "It means," Narcissa said quietly, "that we are being measured." Draco's jaw clenched. "Father would say I should accept whatever is asked." "Your father," she said, "is in Azkaban." The words landed like a slap. They were true, which made them worse than cruelty. Draco rose abruptly and crossed to the hearth. Lucius's chair loomed in the corner of his vision. Intolerable. "So what do you want me to do? Refuse?" "I want you to understand." He laughed harshly. "That's always what adults say when they want you afraid." "Yes," said Narcissa. "Often because fear is merited." He rounded on her. "You think I can't do anything. I think you are 15. I'm not a child." "No?" she said, and for the first time iron entered her voice. "You are precisely old enough to be used and too young to know it when your vanity is praised." The fire snapped between them. Draco had never heard his mother speak so plainly. She and his father had raised him on inference, on atmosphere, on the refinement of contempt. Directness belonged to lower households, to arguments in kitchens, to the Weasleys with their noise and emotions. Yet now, with the old protections failing, she seemed to have set elegance aside as one sets aside jewelry before battle. He looked again at the letter. "If I refuse, won't that look worse?" Narcissa closed her eyes briefly. There may not be a simple refusal available. He knew then that she was frightened, and the realization disturbed him more than the letter itself. Narcissa Malfoy was not a woman who frightened easily. She disapproved, judged, calculated, endured, but fear was for lesser people who lacked family and fortune and poise. If fear had reached her, then the shape of the world had changed more than he had admitted. "What did Snape say?" Draco asked. Her gaze sharpened at once. "Why do you ask?" "Because he knows things." "Yes." A pause. "He does." "Then what did he say?" "That he would watch." Draco gave a bitter half-smile. "Wonderful. I feel safer already." But that night, lying awake in the room where he had slept since childhood, with the snow making the windows glow dimly and the house silent around him, Draco admitted to himself what he had not before. His father's arrest had first humiliated him, then angered him. Then, In certain secret moments excited him with the possibility that he might rise where Lucius had stumbled. Now at last, it terrified him. Not because he doubted his own nerve in schoolboy terms. He could hex, lie, posture, command. He could bully younger students and sneer at Gryffindors and say the hard words expected at his table. But the letter from Voldemort had shown him the abyss beneath performance. This was not a question of joining great men. It was the possibility of being fed to their expectations. The days at the Manor deepened that feeling. Visitors came at strange hours. Some were old family friends offering sympathy with too much smoothness. Some were stern men from the ministry, cataloging holdings and asking polite questions that carried veiled accusation. One afternoon, Aunt Bellatrix arrived like a spark flung into dry leaves, laughing in the front hall, and embracing Narcissa with enough force to bruise. She kissed Draco's forehead and called him a handsome heir with eyes bright from some private fever. He could not tell whether her approval honored or threatened him more. At dinner that night, Bellatrix spoke freely of loyalty, of reputations reforged in fire, of boys in older centuries who had won immortal names before 17. Narcissa kept her face smooth and her answers minimal. The silver gleamed. Lucius's empty chair remained untouched. Draco, trapped between them, ate almost nothing. Later, he passed by the drawing room and heard them speaking in low, sharp tones. "He must be ready," Bellatrix was saying. "He must remain alive," Narcissa answered. Those two verbs seemed to divide the world. When Draco returned to Hogwarts in January, something in him had hardened and hollowed at once. Harry saw it before anyone said a word. Draco's swagger became exaggerated, almost theatrical. He began disappearing for long stretches under pretexts too flimsy even for teachers who preferred not to notice. He joined the inquisitorial squad with more fervor than seemed justified merely by house rivalry. He sneered at Harry with renewed venom, but beneath it there was strain. Harry, who had become unpleasantly practiced at reading fear in those who masked it badly, noticed how often Malfoy's eyes flicked toward windows after an owl arrived. How frequently his hand went to the pocket where letters were kept. How tired he looked after nights when he had clearly not slept. In a bathroom off the hospital wing one bleak February afternoon, Harry overheard Draco being sick. He had ducked in to avoid Filch, who was roaming the corridor with an expression of spiritual fulfillment at the prospect of confiscating contraband. The bathroom was empty except for one closed stall. Harry would have left at once if he had not recognized the dry, ragged sound coming from within. Then Draco spoke. "I can't," he whispered. The words were so stripped of pose that Harry froze. There was no answer, only the splash of water. Draco breathed hard, then again lower and more furious. "I can't." Harry stepped backward before the stall door could open. He slipped out into the corridor with his heart thudding in a way he could not have explained. He did not pity Draco, not simply. He did not forgive him. But that one torn sentence altered the proportions of things again, because it meant whatever Voldemort intended for the Malfoy heir had progressed from implication into demand. The task, when it finally revealed itself in full, was not smaller for being expected. It fell upon Draco in the spring with the exact force Narcissa had feared and Bellatrix had all but celebrated. To redeem the family, to prove usefulness, to show that Lucius Malfoy's imprisonment had not rendered the house sentimental or broken, Draco was ordered to kill Albus Dumbledore. The command remade him. Harry did not learn the specifics at once. He learned the outline through the changed architecture of Draco's days. The failed attempts, the vanishing cabinet, the meetings with suspicious students, the trembling, the rage, the impossible tightness of his face whenever Dumbledore's name was spoken. It was like watching a boy drag a chain no one else could see, except Harry increasingly could. He had his old luck for overhearing, his Felix-assisted glimpses, his suspicious certainty. But more than luck, he had proximity. Two boys of the same age, standing on opposite sides of a war neither had asked to inherit in this particular form. Lucius's arrest had made the task different from the path history once knew. It came earlier in spirit, later in final design, and with a different, emotional weight. In the old shape of events, Draco might have been compelled partly as punishment for his father's failures at the Department of Mysteries. In this altered path, the punishment began much earlier, stretched longer, and was steeped in the humiliation of Lucius's public fall. Draco was not merely proving loyalty. He was being made an emblem. The house would either pay in blood or redeem itself through blood. Harry, once he understood enough, became obsessed with stopping him, not solely out of fear for Dumbledore, though that burned hot enough, but because he sensed with awful clarity that Draco was already halfway destroyed by the demand. Hermione called this a dangerous complication. Ron called it madness. Harry called it reality. "You cannot save every git being used by Voldemort," Ron said one evening in the common room, after Harry had spent half an hour pacing and insisting that Draco was up to something worse than school politics. "No," Harry snapped, "but maybe I can stop one from becoming a murderer." Hermione looked up from her arithmancy notes. "Those aren't always the same thing." He stared at her. She held his gaze. Stopping him may not save him, and saving him may not stop the damage. Harry hated when she said true things that sounded like riddles. Still, he pursued Draco through the year's narrowing corridors. He watched. He listened. He nearly confronted him twice. Each time something stayed his hand. Not cowardice, but the sense that direct accusation would drive Draco deeper into the role forced upon him. Dumbledore, maddeningly, seemed to know far more than he admitted. Snape moved around the problem like a man circling live fire. And above all of it hung the unspoken fact that Lucius Malfoy remained imprisoned, alive enough to feel disgrace and powerless enough not to shield his son from the consequences. The night on the Astronomy Tower came smelling of cold stone and rain not yet fallen. Harry, under his invisibility cloak and following the chain of events that had become inevitable, reached the tower steps with blood in his ears. Below, the castle slept uneasily. Above, on the open height beneath a moon veiled thinly by cloud, Draco had Dumbledore cornered at wand point. It should have looked triumphant. The headmaster weakened, the boy enemy armed, the ancient tower high over the school like a stage prepared by fate. Instead, it looked like tragedy stripped to its beams. Draco's face was white as milk. His wand shook so violently the moonlight trembled on its tip. Dumbledore, though weakened and wandless, stood with a terrible calm that made the whole scene more intimate, not less. He was not addressing an assassin. He was addressing a child standing at the edge of an act that would separate all the rest of his life in two, before and after. "You do not have to do this," Dumbledore said. Draco let out a jagged breath. "I do. He'll kill me. He'll kill my mother. He may even leave Father there to rot forever." The words struck Harry like a hand closing on his throat. He had never heard Draco speak of Lucius with anything but inherited pride or defensive fury. Now there was beneath it all the raw truth. The father in prison, the mother under threat, the son made lever and blade. Dumbledore's voice remained gentle. "Your father's choices placed you in his debt. That does not make the debt just. Don't talk to me about justice." Draco's shout cracked against the night. He took a step forward, then another, then stopped as though the air itself had become too thick to cross. Below, footsteps thundered in the stairwell. Death Eaters arriving through the cabinet, a plan within the plan. The clock had nearly run out. "You think I wanted this?" Draco said, and now tears stood in his eyes though he seemed unaware of them. "You think I wanted to spend all year failing and waiting and knowing everyone's watching me to see whether I can do what my father couldn't?" Harry could hear his own pulse. He could also hear, faintly, other movement in the stairwell, swifter and more controlled than the rest. Dumbledore said, "No, I think you wanted your father back. I think you wanted to be seen as strong. Those are not the same thing." Draco's mouth twisted. "Stop making it sound simple." "It is not simple," Dumbledore said. "It is only clear." The tower door burst open. Bellatrix swept in first, eyes blazing, followed by Greyback, by the Carrows, by others rank with triumph and violence. Their presence ought to have completed Draco's descent. Instead, bizarrely, it seemed to expose his weakness more nakedly. Before Bellatrix's fevered delight, before Greyback's animal grin, Draco looked exactly what he was, a schoolboy in a torn mission too large for him. "Do it!" Bellatrix hissed. He could not. Harry knew it a second before Draco did. The wand remained raised. The arm did not move. The boy's whole body locked in revolt against the command. Bellatrix's smile curdled. And Severus arrived. He came up the tower steps like black weather, silent and swift. His eyes took in the scene. Dumbledore, Draco, Death Eaters, the moon, the impossible crossing of promises. And for a brief instant, Harry, hidden and immobile under the cloak by the binding spell Dumbledore had laid earlier, saw not a teacher, not a spy, not a traitor or savior, but a man standing at the convergence of every oath that had ever ruined him. "Severus," Dumbledore said. The rest of it passed in a blaze too bright for any single perspective to contain. In one version of fate, Snape would kill Dumbledore as arranged to spare Draco and fulfill a darker mercy. In this altered history, where Lucius' imprisonment had stretched the family's torment and sharpened Narcissa's plea months earlier, the emotional weight upon the tower had changed the timing of everything. Bellatrix lunged, not at Dumbledore but at Draco, fury erupting that he had failed in the decisive second. Coward! Severus's wand flashed between them. The curse meant for humiliation or coercion struck stone instead. Greyback snarled. The Carrows shouted. Dumbledore, seeing the entire board collapse into violence, acted with what strength remained. A blast of silver fire roared outward, slamming bodies against the parapet. Harry's buddy bind broke with the shock. He sprang from hiding. No one was prepared for that. Bellatrix screamed Harry's name. Draco whirled, face annihilated by shock. Severus barked something impossible to distinguish. Dumbledore staggered. The sky itself seemed to tilt. Then curses flew in every direction. The battle on the tower lasted less than a minute and stretched in memory to an age. Harry ducked one curse and sent another blazing into a gargoyle. Draco, instead of attacking him, froze as if his own body had betrayed him again. Severus caught Bellatrix's arm and dragged her back from a killing shot that would have hit Harry and perhaps Dumbledore both. Greyback lunged forward and was blasted off his feet by McGonagall, who had reached the stair in a fury of tartan and wrath. The Order was seconds behind. The Death Eaters, realizing the plan had disintegrated, fled downward through the castle rather than complete anything cleanly. In the end, Dumbledore lived. Not untouched. Not victorious in the simple sense, but alive. He lived because Draco failed. Because Severus chose to preserve the boy's failure rather than punish it. Because Bellatrix's zeal made patience impossible. Because Lucius Malfoy, absent in Azkaban, was not there to ensure the plan proceeded with his old aristocratic exactness. Because one change months earlier had bent the line of consequence just enough. Harry found Draco afterward collapsed against the outer wall of the tower stairs, wand hanging useless from his hand, face empty with shock. "It's over," Harry said, though he had no idea whether that was true. Draco gave a sound like broken laughter. "No," he whispered. "No, it isn't." And Harry, looking at him, understood with sick certainty that he was right. A failed murder did not release a family from Voldemort's grip. It merely announced that the grip would tighten. Open war came the way winter rivers flood, after much warning yet still with the force of surprise. Dumbledore's survival on the Astronomy Tower changed the nation's morale, but not its danger. Voldemort did not forgive failure, and failure had now collected around the house of Malfoy like crows on a dead field. Lucius remained imprisoned. Draco had not killed. Severus had protected the boy, but at the cost of exposing to those perceptive enough that his loyalties were not always arranged according to Bellatrix's wishes. Narcissa, having spent a year building quiet fortifications of influence, maternal desperation, and brittle courage, finally understood there would be no safety purchased by half measures. The months that followed were marked by a paradox. Voldemort grew more publicly terrifying and less institutionally elegant. He still infiltrated. He still murdered. He still spread dread through disappearances and marked homes and the recruitment of the desperate or the hateful. But without Lucius at liberty to oil the gears among old families and respectable offices, the regime he wanted arrived more like occupation than seamless political capture. Resistance found more footholds. Neutrality became harder to masquerade as prudence. Dumbledore and the Order, granted time bought in part by a Death Eater patriarch sitting useless behind bars, used that time ruthlessly. Harry, moving now through the final stages of boyhood toward the war meant for him, felt the difference even if he could not have articulated it in the language of politics. The enemy no longer seemed like a velvet hand inside a glove. It seemed like claws through cloth. That made it easier to name. It also made it more vicious. One gray afternoon near Easter, Amelia Bones died. The news hit the ministry like a bell cracked by lightning. She was found in her own home after an attack so violent it seemed designed not merely to remove her, but to avenge humiliation. There were signs of extraordinary magical struggle. Rumor said Voldemort had done it himself. Whether or not that was literally true mattered less than the meaning people attached to it. Amelia Bones had arrested Lucius Malfoy. Amelia Bones had opposed his bail. Amelia Bones had stood in the path of old power with law in one hand and iron in the other. Her death was read, correctly, as vengeance and warning. Scrimgeour became minister soon after with the air of a man taking command of a burning ship, while still hearing the previous captain drown below decks. Harry mourned Amelia in the fierce and private way. One mourns an adult who had not been close but had been solid. She had felt, in a world full of masks, like one of the rare people whose face and purpose aligned. Her murder hardened him. It hardened many. Lucius Malfoy, when he heard of it in Azkaban, sat for a long time without moving. He had wanted her defeated. He had wanted her embarrassed, reversed, diminished by appeals and cleverness and the old machinery of influence. He had imagined returning to his house after a vindicating release and speaking her name with amused contempt over good wine. He had not pictured her dead. Not because he was incapable of wishing death, far from it, but because her death while he remained caged made the world feel too naked. It meant the war had ceased even pretending to be a contest between institutions. It had become, with terrible clarity, a matter of who could still reach the throat of whom, and he remained unreachable, which was its own humiliation. His eventual release, when it came, was not acquittal but expediency. The ministry, overwhelmed and under pressure from all sides, transferred, bargained, lost control of certain categories of prisoners amid broader crises and Dementor instability. Lucius stepped out of captivity thinner, grayer at the temples, and with a look in his eyes that Narcissa recognized at once. Azkaban had not humbled him into virtue. It had changed the temperature of his vanity. It had made him dangerous in a colder, less ornamental way. When the carriage brought him at last back to Malfoy Manor, Draco stood in the entrance hall with his mother and felt no simple joy. His father emerged and paused on the threshold as though measuring whether the house still belonged to him. The peacocks cried beyond the windows. The servants knelt. Narcissa remained upright. Lucius's gaze went first to her, then to Draco. "My son," he said. Draco had imagined this reunion often. In some versions, Lucius embraced him, proud and restored. In others, he rebuked him for weakness. In still others, he said nothing at all, and the silence itself did the wounding. Reality proved subtler and worse. Lucius saw everything at once. The slight gauntness in Draco's face, the strain at the corners of Narcissa's mouth, the altered arrangement of fear in his own house. He understood, instantly and without needing report, that his imprisonment had not merely inconvenienced the family. It had exposed them to judgment from above and below. Draco's failure was visible in the air. "You have grown," Lucius said. It was a sentence that meant nothing and accusation at once. Draco's throat tightened. "Father." Narcissa stepped in before old habits could decide the moment. She took Lucius's hand, not tenderly, but as one might take the hand of a returned commander whose army had changed allegiance in his absence. "Come inside," she said. He did. That evening, with the house sealed and the staff dismissed from hearing range, the family sat together for the first time in a year while the war pressed at every wall. Lucius occupied his chair again. Yet the room did not submit to him as before. He seemed, despite the elegance of his posture, like a man returned to a portrait of his life rather than the thing itself. Narcissa took to the chaise. Draco stood by the fire because sitting felt too much like boyhood. At length Lucius said, "I have heard enough to know mistakes were made." Draco's hand clenched at his side. Narcissa answered before he could. "Your son was given an impossible burden." "Impossible?" Lucius's voice went silk cold. "He failed." Draco looked at him with something like hatred then, and for the first time in his life did not care whether the expression showed. "I didn't put you in Azkaban." The room went still. Lucius stared. In the old days that stare alone would have shattered Draco's nerve. But a year of fear, shame, recruitment, coercion, and almost murder had done what adolescence alone never could. It had taught him that fathers were not gods merely because they sat at the head of a table. "No," Lucius said softly. "You merely failed to repair the damage." "Enough," Narcissa said. But Draco had begun and could not stop. "You want to talk about mistakes? Yours put all of us under him. Yours made him look at me. Yours made Mother spend a year begging snakes and ghosts for scraps of protection while you rotted in a cell." Lucius rose. For one impossible second it seemed he might strike his son. Instead he stood with both hands gripping the carved wood of his chair, and the afterimage of Azkaban showing through the cracks in his composure. "You know nothing," he said. Draco laughed, and the sound was so close to breaking that Narcissa felt fear lance through her. "That's the problem, isn't it? I know exactly enough." Lucius's face hardened, and yet not enough to obey. Narcissa stood too then, moving between them with all the force of rank, blood, and sheer maternal will. "He will not pay for your pride," she said. Lucius looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the last year condensed. Prison, irrelevance, whispered reports, the knowledge that his son had been measured and found wanting by a master he himself had served. But she also saw something else, something she had hoped for and feared equally, that Azkaban had shown him the shape of the cause without its splendor. That absence had let him glimpse how disposable even old names became. "The war has changed," she said. "It always changes," Lucius answered. "No." Her voice dropped. "I mean it has changed beyond the point where family can survive by serving first and bargaining second." He did not contradict her. That silence was the real turning point. Lucius Malfoy never became a good man. Some stories lied for the comfort of symmetry and imagined such transformations. This was not one of them. He remained proud, prejudiced, vain, capable of cruelty by instinct and of cowardice by refinement. But something in him had cracked where self-interest and humiliation met. He had seen, from the wrong side of bars, that Voldemort's world left room for servants only until their usefulness thinned. His house, his line, his son, these were no longer secured by loyalty. They were merely exposed by it. Harry felt the consequences of this change long before he understood its private cause. Information began to leak in odd shapes. A courier vanished before reaching a safe house. A false date on a raid bought the order 6 hours it should not have had. A name once buried among donors to dark causes surfaced in a ministry search. Severus's reports grew sharper. Dumbledore, alive, diminished by curses and age, but still terrifyingly purposeful, spoke once to Harry of fractures within the enemy camp. "Fear rules badly in the long term," he said as they stood on the battlements under a hard white sky. "It commands obedience. It does not inspire coherence." Harry, who had seen Draco break under obedience and Bellatrix glow beneath it, thought of the difference. Malfoy's family? Dumbledore looked out over the grounds where students younger and still spared the full truth, crossed between lessons with scarves bright in the wind. The fall of one pillar often reveals the rot in those that remain. Harry frowned. That sounds like yes. It sounds, Dumbledore said, amused despite everything, like a headmaster choosing his words with due care. In the final year of open war, when Harry hunted not merely survival, but the soul fragments that anchored Voldemort to the world, the arrest of Lucius Malfoy months before Voldemort had wanted his forces properly rebuilt, proved again and again to be one of those changes history would later call minor if it did not understand systems. No battle had been won outright by that arrest. No prophecy altered into peace. Cedric still died. Sirius still carried scars. Children still fought. Amelia Bones still fell. Too much blood answered too many old delusions. Yet Lucius's removal had forced Voldemort into cruder tactics earlier. It had weakened the social lacquer on his movement. It had driven Narcissa sooner toward a defiance born not of morality but of motherhood. It had burdened Draco before he was ready, and thereby broken, irreparably, the fantasy that service was glory. It had deprived the Department of Mystery's trap of elegance and the Astronomy Tower plot of certainty. It had fractured trust among the old houses. And in wars decided not only by strength but by timing, fracture mattered. Years later, in quieter retellings, some would say Voldemort lost because love defeated fear. Others would say he lost because his own soul was too mangled to understand sacrifice. Both were true, in their way. But Harry, who had lived through the uglier logistics of history, knew there was another truth nested inside them. Tyrannies required administrators. Monsters required polished men to book the room, pour the wine, smooth the policy, arrange the inheritance, and explain to themselves that what they did was order. Take one such man away at the wrong time, and the monster still kills, but it kills messier. And in mess, people slipped the knife. On the morning after Voldemort's final fall, the sun rose over Hogwarts and lit the stones gold. Smoke drifted. Broken walls steamed in the cold. Survivors moved among the dead with the silence of those who had not yet chosen tears or speech. Harry stood in the courtyard feeling older than the light. Across the stones, not far from where healers tended the wounded, he saw the Malfoys together. Narcissa stood with one arm around Draco's shoulders, not clinging, not collapsing, simply holding. Lucius was beside them, thinner than the father Harry remembered from childhood, elegance dulled but not erased, face marked by the knowledge of how thoroughly the war had stripped pretense from his life. None of them looked noble. None of them looked redeemed. They looked what they were, survivors of their own choices, and of choices forced upon them, bound together not by virtue, but by the simple fact that they had chosen, at the final edge, family over a master who would have consumed them. Draco met Harry's eyes across the courtyard. No sneer came. No apology either. The distance between them remained full of school corridors, insults, cowardices, envies, cruelties, and the dead. But there was also recognition, exhausted and strange. Harry inclined his head once. After a beat, Draco did the same. Then the moment passed. He turned back to his parents. The courtyard filled with movement. Above them all the castle, scarred and ancient, stood into the morning like a kingdom that had survived another season of dragonfire and betrayal. And in the clean, hard light of that new day, the full shape of the old Divergence could finally be seen. Lucius Malfoy's arrest had not saved the world. It had not purified anyone. It had not turned villains into saints or spared the innocent everything they would otherwise suffer. But it had taken from Voldemort, at a crucial hour, one of the men best able to translate terror into governance and prejudice into polished obedience. That loss had made the Dark Lord lean sooner on brutality than on elegance, on zeal rather than architecture, on fear rather than the slow corruption of institutions. It had made his kingdom arrive before its foundations were ready. And because of that, When the moment finally came for boys and girls, and battered men and women to push back against the dark with whatever love, rage, courage, and desperation they possessed, there were cracks already in the walls. Sometimes history turned not on a prophecy alone, nor on a duel, nor even on the heroism remembered afterward in songs and schoolbooks, but on the simple fact that one polished hand was not there at the right time to steady the knife.